when you buy a 16-inch kit, you get a pre-formed skeleton, and a lot of the sort of hard work is actually done for you. There's a lot of curves and that already in the skeleton, the curve of the spine, the elbows. So we thought about how to actually prepare you to sort of start making a fairy, and started you off with that. This is a sort of illustration using a 16-inch kit of how you can build a Whimsy's Pride, and we've extended the things that you can get with the kit now to include the skirt, the hat and the dandelion. And we've recently been supplying a rod, so if you want to build a fairy that's self-supported, so it's i.e. stood on one leg like Whimsy's Pride, you can buy the rod that you have to bend to actually include in the skeleton. So what I've done is to prepare a data sheet, if you like, which is an exact sort of map of what that support would be. So on the illustration here, there's a skeleton with its support on, and the skeleton's attached to it. But you've got to get the support bent exactly right to match the skeleton. So what I've done is to actually do an actual layout to scale, that if you print this out A4 and then bend the rod to actually fit the drawing, it will fit the skeleton exactly right, and it'll be right to create a Whimsy's Pride. And then I've done a scale, again printed out A4, of the curvature and the layout of the actual skeleton. So you can make your skeleton and overlay it against the drawing to see if you've got it right. It even shows you how much to flesh it out and give you a better idea. One of the very important things that we have to get right is the scale, because all printers behave slightly differently. If you print this out on A4, there's a scale at the bottom that measures 100 millimeters. So when you've printed it out, just measure that. If that's 100 millimeters, then all of the sizing will be correct. If it's not, you may have to adjust the printout accordingly. So I'm going to show you how to form the stand, how to bend that to actually use this diagram to achieve that stand. And then I'm going to put this skeleton into a Whimsy's Pride pose to show you how we got to stage one of this feature. And this is little P. You're going to help me, aren't you, little P? You are. I know, you are. Look at the camera. Look at the camera. Hey, people watching you, little P. Yes. Yep. Come on. So the first thing to do is take this straight rod. It's 4 mil rod. It's quite sort of high tensile, so it's quite springy. I'm going to form that into the shape on the diagram, which is the stand for Whimsy's leg. So where I start, there's sort of two stages to it. First stage is to get this profile on the left, and that will go completely flat against the diagram, and we're matching the diagram exactly, and that's why it was important to get the printout exactly the right scale. And then once we've got stage one, we can turn it sideways and start doing the other profile. So the first thing to do is to go to point 1, which is the left hip, put the wire across the diagram and actually mark where the right hip is. So I've got a little mark there, and then I'm going to bend this, put that in the vise. Oh, a bit awkward to do while you're on camera. Actually gone past right angles, because I'll explain in a minute why that is. So it's actually not bad. I was expecting to have to adjust that, but that's sort of worked out perfectly. Just sort of have that's fine. So what I can do now, if I needed to adjust it, I could. I could sort of bash it a bit more or open it up a little bit more. So you might have to tweak it. I was very fortunate to just get it right first time. So I lay that on the diagram and then mark where position 3 is, where the knees are. Now it's actually, I'm going to have to bend it further out and then curve it back in, because the shin bone is a sort of curve, and it's not a consistent curve. The shape of a shin looking from the front it's quite a tight curve at first and then it goes almost sort of straight, so it's not very consistent. So I'm actually going to bend it out further than looks necessary in order to start that curve correctly. So I'll do this on this side. So we'll put this across the vise, keep that hip line sort of horizontal so I know I'm bending it in the right orientation. And bend it, I'm hitting it as close as I can to the vise to keep all of these bends tight. That's why I need the vise rather than just doing it with pliers. So that looks like it comes a long way out, but it's probably about right to start that curve. So what I'm going to do is put this in the vise, keeping that horizontal again, and just try and bend that by hand. And just keep putting it against the diagram to see how we're doing. So again, it's not actually bad. It wants to just go a little bit more out from there. So line everything up with the vise to make sure I'm doing something that's a completely flat shape. And it may require several little touches. So now I've got the top of it right, it's not quite coming in at the bottom. So just put that in the vise so it stops it twisting on me. And then just tweak that. And just keep referring to the diagram, getting a little bit of a wave in it that way, so just make sure it's nice and flat. That's pretty bang on at that, so hopefully you can see that on the camera. So what I'm going to do now is mark where the ankle is. Now what you probably can't see from the distance from the camera is there's another line down here, there's a centre line, so from the centre of the hips, the knees and the ankle all sort of join, follow that same line. So the knees and the ankle both match the sort of centre line, if that sort of makes sense. So what I'm going to do now is just put a kink in this ankle. So the bottom rod just lines up with the centre of those hips. So again, put this completely horizontal. So making sure that's nice and level that way, so I'm not creating a three-dimensional shape at the moment, I'm just doing 2 dimensions. Again, hitting it close to the vise. Just knock that out and look down this line and it should line up with the centre of that, which looks pretty good. So if I line that over that, I'm happy with that. That's a good fit and it exactly matches the diagram. So what I'm going to do now is to put the other dimensions in. So I'm going to turn it sort of 90 degrees to make that sort of horizontal, and then we're going to put the curves in and the main kink to gives her the angle that Whimsy is supported at. It's very important that you get this the right way around. The Whimsy that I've sort of shown is supported on her right leg. So that means that that's her right hip. So it's got to be that way on because it's the back leg that's doing the support. So, you know, she'll be supported across here and her other leg will sort of be in space this way. If I do it that way around, it would be a left leg rather than a right leg. So it's very important that you get this the right way around. So the first thing I'm going to do is put this curve in. Now this is a consistent curve, unlike the shin one. This is fairly consistent curve. So what I'm going to do is just put that in the vise, meaning that's forced to be horizontal. And I'm just going to bend this by hand. I don't just want to bend it round on the vise, so there's only bend at this end. So I'm sort of bending it consistently across the whole length to that knee. A little bit further at this end. So we'll just hold that there and give me a bit more. And we'll just keep laying it over that diagram until we've got that right. So from the, I think it just wants a bit more, just this end now. So I'm looking down from the top to make sure I get the right profile. And I'm happy with that, so that's fine. So that curve's right, the knees match, but you can see that this doesn't line up with the ankle, so there's another kink at the knee. It isn't like a consistent smooth curve. There is a little bit of a bend in the knee because your legs don't go perfectly straight even when they're locked out. So if I hold that in the right orientation, that should be vertical, which it is. That's exactly on the knee. So just go a little bit further to put that kink in. Making sure that's vertical. It won't lie flat on the paper now, because if I lie it flat on the paper, this is coming at an angle. So I've got to make sure that that's standing up vertical and look down on the top of it. And that's pretty bang on now. So now I'm going to go back to where the ankle is. I've still got the mark. Put that in the vise. At the ankle mark, make sure that's still lined up with the vise, so that's got to go that way. Now I'm taking that leg over to the angle that will be to support Whimsy. I'm keeping this vertical at all times. That's about the right angle, but I suspect I've just moved that off a little bit. See, that's twisted, so what I just need to do is just twist that a bit to get it sort of straight. So that's vertical, that's at the right angle. I think I've got a bit of a kink in there. Right, I'm happy with that now, so we can now lock that onto the skeleton, and I'll show you that next stage. So we've got our rod and it matches our diagram now. So we're happy with that. That's the rod, so that's going to attach to the skeleton and it's going to be supported by that sort of vertical piece. So we're done with the first page. So we're now going to take our skeleton, which, like I said, sort of comes with most of the curves in. Now, if we've got this correct, this should match the skeleton because the skeleton's been bent to the same basic shape, and it's, you know, 99% of the way there. I'm more than happy with that. So we're now going to join these two together, and then we can use this diagram to actually put the skeleton into the shape of Whimsy. Or we could do it the other way around, but I find it easier to sort of get the support correct first. So on my bench I've got holes everywhere where I'm supporting different things. It's probably, you could have just as easily put that in the vise and hold it up, but I basically want to hold that vertical, so that's sort of the shape that that's going to be. And all I'm going to do is use a piece of wire and attach the skeleton to that, so that, again, this is the right leg. Important to get that correct. So I'm literally just going to sort of take a piece of 1.2mm wire and sort of almost sew this on. Just get a wrap around first before I worry too much about it, just so it all holds together. So I'm trying to get that corner of the rod into the corner of the hips. Now you'll notice it doesn't go all the way across. It isn't the same width as the hips of the skeleton. That's quite deliberate, because otherwise all that right angle at the top does is to prevent the rod from turning inside the figure. So it just gives a sort of lock in there. It's not meant to form the sort of hips. So it's just there to lock it in. So if I do the sort of horizontal part across her hips first, get that in, and then follow this down the leg. And what I want to do is, the two wires at the bottom of the skeleton are basically used for her foot, so if I just bend them sort of out of the way so there's nothing interfering with that rod, and just sort of keep that as close to the the rod and the skeleton as close as possible. And just wrap it round, so that every ½ inch or so do another loop. Now I'm pulling it as sort of tight as I reasonably can, but I'm not worrying about the tension of the wire. Right, so that's attached. I've got way too much wire, but because I'm actually starting to build the fairy now, the excess I can just sort of wrap around the skeleton, and it's just sort of helping me create a bit of a framework to sort of flesh it out later on. So just use whatever excess there is to sort of almost start the build, if you like. When I'm building a fairy, I always like to try and get some sort of sense of the head, because the skeleton doesn't have a head, it just has a neck with a loop on it for building the head. So one of the first things I tend to do is just create some sort of ball of wire, just so I can appreciate where the head is. So that's sort of attached, but what I'm actually going to do now is go around them loops and twist them with the pliers, just to put a lot more tension into that wire and really pull the skeleton and the rod together. You'll sort of feel them tighten up and go together as you do it. So there you go, so that's the rod attached to the skeleton. Now the skeleton's still a generic skeleton, it just happens to be at a strange angle. So all I've got to do now is actually make it match this. So if I hold that down that leg, the stomach's not too bad, but she's definitely arched quite a long way back. This left leg, do it with pliers so you get a nice tight bend. Bring that leg forward. Nowhere near far enough. So it's a bit, you know, trial and error just to get it somewhere like. So the head's further forward, but there's quite a kink in the neck. That leg's now. So remember that centre line, the left leg follows the same rules, that the knee and the ankle should sort of come to the sort of same centre line, so it gives you some sort of sense of what you're looking at. So you start to sort of see a Whimsy Pride, although she looks like she's got some sort of disorder with her arms down like that, so now sort her arms out. So which one is it? So this arm, the way that you walk is your arms and legs tend to go in opposite directions. If you put them the same way, it looks like you've got some sort of disorder. Now there is a kink in the arm when you get the skeleton, just to show you where the elbow is. That's probably sufficient for the left arm. The right arm is going to be sort of supporting the dandelion, so it goes further forward, but I've got to get it even slightly beyond right angles with the elbow, because that's going to be supporting the dandelion. And it sort of comes slightly in, if you imagine she's going to be carrying the dandelion like that. And we're sort of getting pretty close actually. I think this leg wants to come out a bit more. The shoulders are slightly up and facing back, just to give her that sort of bit of attitude. And this isn't as exact as the stand because it's a three-dimensional model, and to some extent it's what looks right when you put that vertically. You can sort of look at it and say, is that roughly what I want? And you can sort of adjust it to sort of get the stance that you want. Now that should pretty much match that, which it does. So we're sort of there. Couple of things to note, just a sort of way of explanation. The spine on a human would never be that far, but because it's not, this isn't a human skeleton, this is an armature for a figure, because basically where the hips are is where your hips would be on a human skeleton, but where your spine would begin would be further round, because you'd have a whole pelvis there, so your spine starts in a different place than your hips. Obviously the way we've made the skeleton, you can't do that, so it means that it sort of looks more curved than it is, because the spine would be sort of higher up and less curved. When you start adding wire, you've got to sort of take that into consideration where the spine would be. The head would be a lot bigger, so it still looks a bit out of proportion, but I mean, as I've said in some of the other videos, it's worth spending time on this skeleton to make sure it tells a story and you're happy with it before you add any wire. If you're not happy with it, keep playing with it. It wouldn't matter if you spend an hour or two on it. If you think that's almost good enough without any wire, then that's the time you can start adding some wire. So that's all there is to it. So we've done the rod, we've got the rod to exactly match the diagram, and we've got this to match it as approximately as we can, and the real test is to put that in a vise or a hole so it's going to be supported. If you've got a stand to put it in when you're finished anyway, then actually set it up as it's going to be finished and say, is that skeleton telling the story and is it in the right pose? And that's all there is to it.